John, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to begin by asking you, why are you standing in Buckingham?
Well, firstly, I think this convention that the Speaker is unopposed by the main parties is just ridiculous. That deprives the people of Buckingham of a proper general election and a proper MP, and that should be changed. Secondly, I think there is a tremendous issue over Mr. Burko's own personal conduct in the expenses scandal, and indeed the fact that as Speaker he has become symbolic of this breakdown of trust in Parliament. And that is a really serious question at any time, but particularly now with the state of the economy, when whoever wins the election is going to have to take some very, very tough measures. And I think there is an issue of whether there will be democratic consent for that unless we draw a line, a dramatic line under the expenses scandal. And defeating the Speaker, something which has never happened before in history, would certainly do that. And thirdly, I think the people of Buckingham have the right to an ordinary, hard-working MP whose priority is them and not some grand office or grand cause.
John, one of the biggest issues of this election is the state of the economy. What is your take on that?
One of the advantages of being an independent is you can tell it as it is, and I don't think any of the main parties are being honest with the electorate about the scale of the difficulties which we face. It's much more than simply a question of just firefighting an excessive deficit. The state of our economy has been wrong for over a generation now because of our reliance first on North Sea oil and then the particular way in which globalisation took place following the end of the Cold War. We've got an economy that is too orientated towards financial services, not enough towards manufacturing. It's too dependent on debt. We don't save enough, we don't invest enough, and we import too much and we don't export enough. So we've got to turn our economy around very fundamentally. And being able to speak that truth and the toughness of the measures that are going to be necessary to address that problem is one of my main priorities in this campaign.
I think a lot of people would blame the bankers and the huge bonuses that they're receiving. You yourself were a banker in the city. Do you think they are to blame?
Well, when I was working in the city, which is now nearly 20 years ago, as a frontline foreign exchange trader, the difference between the volume of financial transactions and real transactions in the economy, the difference between the amount of turnover on the foreign exchange market and real trade, was about 5 to 1. Now, in the height of this crisis, we got to a situation where it was nearly 100 to 1. So the imbalance between financial transactions and what is actually going on in terms of trade has become completely out of kilter. And part of that has been that huge encouragement to risk-taking and to trading that the reward structure in the city brought about. And I think it's vital that we cap salaries and have an arrangement in which over a certain level people should be only paid in shares or a share of profit over a long term, which ensures that those profits are real. But equally, I think there is a case for breaking up the banks so that we are no longer in the position of being held to ransom, essentially, by institutions that are too large to fail. And that is a very important part of changing our culture from being one which is too dependent on the short term, too dependent on market operations and trading, and not enough on the real economy, particularly manufacturing. It's this imbalance between financial services and the real economy that, not just in Britain but around the world, is the root of our trouble.
John, what is it about you and your experience that makes you right for this job?
I come from an agricultural background. My family come from Devonshire. The rural economy there is very similar to the one in Buckingham, in that it's very much orientated towards livestock. I went to the city. I was a currency trader, which educated me in the most powerful way imaginable of what I consider to be the principal problem which we face, this imbalance between the internationalization of economics and that political power has remained national. That is what encouraged me to go to the European Parliament, and there I represented the adjacent constituency, because at that time there were constituencies for the European Parliament, the Thames Valley, which is also quite similar to Buckingham. It's a southeast growth economy. And since leaving the European Parliament over the last 10 years, apart from writing, I've been engaged in investments in agriculture and also in infrastructure, particularly rail infrastructure. And of course that's relevant too, because one of the major issues in Buckingham is the new high-speed rail link. So I would say that I have a range of experiences that match quite well the sort of economy and the sort of culture and society that we have in Buckingham.
John, where do you stand on one of the big issues right now about the huge public deficit this country is facing, whether taxes should be increased, public expenditure should be cut? What do you think?
Well, I think it's ludicrous that we've got a debate that is narrowing down to the situation of whether we cut the deficit today, tomorrow, or the day after that. It's much more complicated than that. If you are going to make any impression on international markets, and it's retaining their confidence, which is absolutely crucial, then you have to take steps to cut the deficit immediately, because any measures you take are going to take time to implement anyway. And I don't think that has come across sufficiently in the way in which the main parties have been addressing this question. As regards the balance between increasing taxation and cutting expenditure, the answer is you have to do both, given the scale of the numbers that we are dealing with. And again, I think that the main parties are not being honest about that. The only proviso is that it is vital that we take measures that encourage growth in the reorientation of our economy, particularly away from financial services towards manufacturing. And therefore any taxation that we impose has got to be consistent with encouraging export growth industries, because that is how we're going to pay our way in the world in the future. And ultimately it's through growth that you will reduce both the deficit and ensure that the imbalances in our economy are removed.